Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we will travel to the land of the Vikings. Before your phone invents one more reason to stay awake, let's try an older trick. Picture a wooden hall, breathing quietly by a moonlit shore. Hear a door's iron ring lift like a shy bell. Feel wool at your shoulders, the good kind that forgives. Before you get sleepy, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if it really helps you sleep more comfortably. And please, let me know in the comments where you are listening in from and what time it is for you. Tonight, we'll drift with sea roads and wintering harbors, with longships that once skim the skin of the water, like swans that secretly loved speed. We begin when night begins. The hour belongs to blue. Not the loud blue of banners or brave paint, but the deep, milked kind that slips under doorways and lays its hand on the water like a blessing done quietly. A gull folds itself like a closing book. Tar loosens in a pot and sends up the small pine promise that makes shipwrights nod. Ropes rest in patient spirals. Their cut ends are spliced into tidy hearts. The jetty boards creak, polite as chairs shifting to make room. People say Viking, and the mind tries to draw iron and storm at once. Let's soften the light a little. In many northern inlets, Viking is simply seafarer, a farmer when the rye is thinking, a trader when the tides write an invitation. Raiding sits in history like a heavy tool on the back shelf. Tonight, we choose the tools at hand. Market scales, bone needles, adzes that prefer persuasion to pride, wool cloaks that forgive drafts with grace. Inga arrives first. She walks like someone who knows how a ledger breathes. Her cloak is oiled against weather. Her hands smell faintly of lanolin and ink. On her shoulder, a sack that holds amber beads the color of patient honey, a curled ledger wrapped in leather, a comb or two carved with shy vines, and 6 flat rounds of shipbread baked to the firmness of good advice. She sets the sack down, soft thud, cloth, not coin, and unties the cord. The amber catches the harbor and keeps a little of it, the way a window keeps the afternoon. One bead holds a bug from a long ago forest, a tomorrow that chose to rest. She does not trade that one. Mascots are useful if you don't brag about them. Leaf comes with the unhurried stride of a man whose thoughts arrive at the same time as his boots. A boatwright by trade, he listens to timber the way some people listen to gossip. Interested, but kind. Over his shoulder, an adze with a handle so polished by palms it might have learned manners. At his belt, a small bag of iron nails that click like patient punctuation. He kneels by the hull of Swan's Road, a broad-bellied trader with planks laid clinker-wise, each one overlapping the next like shingles practicing harmony, and runs his hand along the grain. Oak here, he says softly, thumb learning the ring count, pine outside. Let the singer carry the song. He taps a rivet and hears it answer with the modest ring that means I'll hold. Freya arrives last and fastest. Cloak, a size too brave for her shoulders, cheeks bright with the idea of stars. She has 3 flat stones in her pocket, each one elected to the office of counting, and a question hunting for a shape. Which star mines north when the others forget? Inga points to the small patient one that sits night after night where sailors say the door is. That one doesn't travel, she answers. It keeps watch. Leaf adds, or it's the only one who remembered what we agreed. The settlement behind them edits itself into evening. Smoke leaves the longhouse roofs less like news and more like thought. A dog circles thrice in the manners of ancient comfort and collapses near a warm stone. From a shed comes the faint thock of a cooper, persuading a hoop to be honest. Somewhere a handbell lifts and settles, the shy note of iron greeting wood. Inventory is not only counting, it is a lullaby for anxious hours. Inga opens her ledger and taps down the day. She writes a tiny mark beside spare quills, because ink tends to arrive in moods and leave in stains. Near the bottom, she sketches a little star, the mark she uses for fair weather, promised by those who can't promise weather. Only their own behavior, if it worsens. Leaf sets a clay pot of pitch near a brazier and works a long snake of black between his fingers until it shines. He presses it into the seam between planks, the way you press a friend's hand when the road takes a new curve. The smell is forest and fire at once. He leans into the curve of the hull and listens. A good hull has nothing to confess, only a hum in the key of steady. He hefts the steering oar and lets it balance itself in his palm. An oar will tell you the angle it prefers if you ask politely. Tomorrow, he says to Freya, you'll hear the boat. Not with your ears. With your bones, they've been so kind to you. Leaf sets a clay pot of pitch near a brazier and works a long snake of black between his fingers until it shines. He presses it into the seam between planks, the way you press a friend's hand when the road takes a new curve. The smell is forest and fire at once. He leans into the curve of the hull and listens. A good hull has nothing to confess, only a hum in the key of steady. He hefts the steering oar and lets it balance itself in his palm. An oar will tell you the angle it prefers if you ask politely. Tomorrow, he says to Freya, you'll hear the boat. Not with your ears. With your bones, they've been so kind to you. Supper is a sensible kindness. Stew of fish and barley, onions coaxed into sweetness, herbs that pretend to be modest and are not. Bread is both trencher and guest. Inga tears a piece and dips it, then sets it on Freya's bowl as if conferring a small rank. Everything that floats, she says, has a shore to return to. Freya nods as if that were the last sentence of a very good book. After bowls or minutes, quiet ones. A neighbor arrives with a barrel meant for grain and a smile meant for everyone. The cooper taps the staves lightly in a circle. The sound comes back well balanced, like a wagon wheel humming on a road that agrees with it. Inga asks about the fair on Bornholm, cloth sellers, salt, glass beads. Bring a proverb, the sister says, setting down a wedge of cheese. It oils the hinge on any bargain. Inga has several and sifts them as a cook sifts flour. 2 good trades make a third. Pay with weights, profit with thanks. Sailcloth is a map when folded right. She chooses none for the moment. It is delicious to keep a good sentence and spend it later. Leaf pulls out the small plane he likes best, the civil blade, and shaves a scrap of pine until the curls rise and fall faster than thought. Freya crowns herself with a ribbon of wood and declares the fashion in season. The dog approves by not moving. The curls smell like fresh ideas. Inga tucks one into her ledger because pages remember better when scented. Outside, the tide places a wet handprint on the post and lifts it away. Leaf checks Swan's Road again by lamplight, seeking the little jobs that tomorrow will bold into urgent if ignored. Lashings that want a new half-hitch, a pin that would enjoy grease, a loop that looks tired of pretending not to be frayed. He passes his thumb along the seam he pitched, and hears the ship reply, not with noise, but with the way a board accepts pressure without sulking. Freya helps by handing tools with the ceremony of a bishop. Mallet, twine, the bronze fid that slides between strands, like a polite wedge. When she begins to hum, the cadence matches the boat's slow shift against the fenders. Inga listens from the door and hears tomorrow arranging itself kindly. The helmsman's hand on the oar, the low talk of oars in the morning before wind wakes, the sail's white triangle rising with a shy creak that means purpose. A traveler passes the threshold and leaves behind a weather sentence. Sky due west is flat as pewter. Inga files it under reef before breakfast. She does not say storm. She says lesson, because words wear lives, and she prefers the ones that come home with their boots still friendly. Before sleep, there is the small business of mending. A glove gets a new thumb, stitched with bone needle and thread waxed to good behavior. A tear in sailcloth is taught to be two pieces again, with a seam that understands exile in return. Leaf shows Freya how to ask the needle through thick wool, not force it. Everything that yields, he murmurs, wants to be asked. She tries, and the thread agrees with her. Runa arrives with a story, which is how night is properly told to be gentle. She speaks like someone combing fleece. Slow, even, stopping to free a burr without annoyance. Once, she says, a boat thought it was only wood. Then the wind borrowed its shoulder, the water lent it a road, and the stars said they would keep the door open. It sailed because 3 friends had made a 4th. Freya leans in, as if listening could thicken a cloak. Leaf pretends to sharpen a blade to the same rhythm. Inga closes her eyes, but not her ears. The longhouse settles further. Herbed steam becomes memory in bowls. Someone yawns, the kind of yawn that starts in the soles of the feet and travels north like a migrating idea. The dog negotiates a square of floor that will later be required by someone's boots and wins. A lamp is pinched out with a spoon that has learned to be bell-shaped. Smoke lifts to the roof's dark lessons and finds its pocket. When the door opens to let an errand go, a square of night enters and lays itself respectfully on the floor, smelling of salt and far pine. Leaf lifts the iron ring and sets the bar. The ring gives its shy bell, as if metal had manners and liked to show them in private. He tests the hinge he filed last week. It answers with that secret smoothness that makes a door confident without bragging. Freya arranges herself into sleep with the serious attention children give tasks adults ruin by comment. Cloak, rolled just enough under cheek. Hand finding the smooth wood of the bench that has been back, boat, bed, and witness. She puts the 3 flat stones by her head, like friends who volunteered for guard. Inga slides the ledger under her own cloak, so the night will warm the numbers into kindness. Leaf sits last, as he often does, listening for the house to say it is safe. If you'd like to hold something while your eyes grow heavy, take this quiet inventory and lay it along your breath. A coil of rope warm with pitch, a brass scale whose pans kiss when made equal, a bone needle with a thread that forgives and holds, a curl of pine that smells like a page beginning, a horn window that keeps the last light like watered honey, a bowl whose rim remembers every winter it softened, a steering oar that will, tomorrow, learn the day's opinions without complaint. Count them forward, count them back, and let counting become breathing. Outside, the fjord wears starlight like thin embroidery. Somewhere beyond the headland, the sea has rolled out its long ribbon and ironed a path upon it with wind and patience. Swan's Road dreams on her moorings and tries a small movement, the half-turn of a sleeper thinking of morning. Inga's amber, tucked away, hums sun under leather. Leaf's hands forget to hold and remember to rest. Freya's mouth shapes north once, then says nothing, trusting that the star already understands. The lantern waits at the door, flame trimmed small and certain, glass fogging and clearing as the room breathes. Its circle lies on plank and wool, and the threshold where inside becomes out. It says the same one-word sentence over and over without getting bored. Here, you carry that circle behind your eyes as you turn your face toward sleep. The harbor matches your pace. Out for 6, in for 4, patient as old wood. The sea, pleased with everyone's manners, agrees to keep breathing at your pace until morning arrives. Soft-footed, to borrow the door ring's little bell once more, morning takes the harbor by the shoulders and shakes out the last folds of night. The shy bell on the longhouse door answers the day, and we step inside without ceremony, just as you'd move from one page to the next. Smoke curls in slow ribbons under the ridge. Horn windows drink the pale light and warm it to the color of watered honey. The central hearth keeps its small republic alive. Embers banked like good savings, a kettle offering its first thoughtful sigh. Benches line the walls like well-behaved shorelines. Pegs hold cloaks that remember last night's stew. A dog already occupies the prime patch of warmth on the floor and has begun negotiations for annexing the next best patch. The room smells of wool, tar that rode in on sleeves, and a breeze that followed someone in and forgot to leave. Leaf chooses his patch of daylight, a square of floor near the door where the morning settles like flour. He lays out tools in a quiet semicircle, as if inviting them to a modest feast. There's the adze with its swan neck curve, the broad axe with shoulders meant for honesty, a draw knife with handles the color of toast, the small plane that turns thought into ribbon, a brace and a handful of auger bits, chisels wrapped in oiled cloth like well-raised children, a whetstone the size of a gray loaf. He runs his palm along a plank leaned against a post and listens in that attentive way of his, as if wood keeps a diary and might read him a line. Freya arrives with an armful of kindling and a face that says, "The sky mentioned a plan." She tips the sticks into the hearth's appetite, takes a poker like a small scepter, and makes the coals remember their better selves. She has 3 pebbles in her pocket, counting, and sometimes a skipping stone, and the star from last night still balanced in her thoughts. The dog allows her one ear. It is a privilege. Inga, sleeves neat, hair braided into decisions, moves through the room counting stores by hand. She presses barley sacks to hear their answer. She lifts a leather bottle and nods at the weight of ale that is mostly water. A stack of folded cloth leans like a soft wall. She checks for moth's difficult opinions and finds none. Near the window sits a brass scale, its pans kiss when made equal. Inga polishes them with linen and a hum. On the table, her ledger loosens the thong that holds it and greets the day. She writes coal, small, enough, salt, kind. Bread, 4 rounds, fish nails, ask the smith. On the margin, she draws a tiny lantern because the morning is behaving. Come, Leaf says to Freya, tapping the plank. Hearing lesson. He raps it with his knuckles just once. Oak, he says, and raps another. Pine. Oak answers with the steadiness of tomorrow. Pine with the quick cheer of today. He tilts each board so sunlight slides along the grain. Tight rings where the tree had hard years, he says. Looser where seasons were generous. Both are useful. Neither needs apology. He marks a knot with thumb and eye. This one once was a branch that wanted a separate career. We will admire it and then work around it. He sets the plank on a shaving horse, a simple bench with a foot clamp, and seats himself as if meeting an old friend. The draw knife pulls toward him, two-handled, making long curls that fall and keep their curl as if auditioning for a festival. The room fills with that scent, resin and morning. The curls nest at Freya's feet. She decides they are crowns, then rivers, then small sleeping animals. Leif gives her a conspirator's smile and trims a curl fine as a ribbon. Fashion is rooted, he says, handing it to her. Literally. The dog approves without moving. Runa settles by the warp-weighted loom that leans against the wall like a patient tree. Smooth stones hang from the warp threads to keep everything honest. She combs wool with 2 paddles that look like brushes for giants. Burrs surrendering to soft persistence. A shuttle waits like a short canoe. Over, under, beat, breathe, she says. And the loom remembers the rhythm on her behalf. Freya tries, tongue peeking at the corner of her mouth. Her hands catch the time of it, and a strip of cloth begins being born, unhurried and inevitable. By the door, a small steam box snugs against a brazier, a plank-length coffin for stubborn wood that would like to become wise. The kettle on its shelf wheezes amiably. Leaf checks the water, sets in a thin rib of oak, and lowers the lid. Heat is persuasion, he says. We won't force a bend. We'll make bending seem like the plank's own idea. He shows Freya the forms, 2 uprights and a curved crosspiece like a smile, and the pegs waiting to catch the arc when it arrives. Ask politely, he says, and then ask again. Outside, someone beats dust from a cloak in bright, cheerful thuds. Inside, Inga calls a short muster for housekeeping disguised as lunch. Bowls arrive in 2 sizes, hungry and slightly less hungry. The stew is last night's values made new. Fish remembering the sea, barley practicing patience, onions having achieved generosity. Bread appears. Bread is always in season. She tucks a pinch of herbs into the pot from a packet labeled, in her tidy hand, for days that insist. The steam lifts and declares the day salvageable, which is the best declaration. A neighbor drops by with a pot that developed a shy handle. Leaf inspects it as if it were a dignitary and produces a sliver of oak cut to wedge shape. He kisses the grain with his small plane, taps the wedge into the slot, and the handle remembers it is a handle. There, Leif says, the exact vowel he uses for ribs, hinges, and certain kinds of conversations. The neighbor tries the pot for balance, then sets it down with ceremony and a contribution of dried apples for whoever keeps the stew charitable. The longhouse accepts. At the loom, colors wake a winter palette. Undyed cream, quiet gray, a bit of indigo. Runa coaxed from plants with patience and a secret recipe that involves argument and kindness. Freya learns to beat the weft in, not too hard. Cloth resents zeal. Not too soft. Cloth laughs at timidity. Cloth remembers the hands that made it, Runa tells her, and your hands will thank you later when the wind tries to have opinions. Inga brings her ledger to the window where the light is good and the horn makes everything a little kinder. She copies yesterday's totals in careful strokes, then adds notes on who in the lane will want salt fish before the thaw, who has spare onions, who is expecting a child and therefore deserves a blanket sooner than the blanket realizes. She tucks under the thong a scrap from the monk, last night's R, and lets its stern loop watch over the page. R for remember, she murmurs. R for right-sized. Leaf opens the steam box with a hiss that smells like forest after rain. The rib, pliant, interested, comes out shining. He sets it on the form and coaxes the curve with both hands. He and Freya press together, a duet of pressure and please. Hold, he breathes. Pegs slip into receiving holes. The rib stays, surprised at its own agreeableness. We'll leave it until it forgets it was ever a straight line, he says. Like certain stories, Inga offers, passing with bowls. Like certain moods, Runa adds dryly. Everyone pretends not to smile too widely. There is mending. A net sulks in the corner. Two neighbors sit with it on their laps and make it whole again. Knot shift, the mesh growing like patience. A glove gets a patch. A boot heel acquires a new idea of itself with a peg and a firm argument from Leaf's little hammer. Freya sews a line of large stitches on a scrap, straight as truth, then wobbly as giggle, then straighter again. Visible mending, Inga says approvingly. We show our repairs because hiding them doesn't teach anyone anything. Near the door, Leaf kneels over the small plane for a talk with the whetstone. A dulled tool is a complaint in disguise, he tells Freya. He whets the stone. Slow circles with the blade, a sound like a happy cat. He opens the angle a breath, then closes it. The edge finds its true vowel. He tests it on a hair. No drama, just that little confident catch. He strops it on a bit of leather and looks pleased, which in Leaf's face is a small, honest sunrise, a knock. The harbor keeper steps in, eyebrows still keeping the village ledger, while the actual ledger is eating stew. She brings news. The law thing meets tomorrow, inside, cold, to decide about the path to the well, drifts, and to settle a boundary someone tried to move by the width of a boot. Bring your good listening, she says. Inga slips the note into her ledger, and the harbor keeper takes her bowl and says, Your stew remembers summer better than mine. Inga replies, It's because I overpraise onions, which is at least partly true. The dog, still of the opinion that gravity is a group project, relocates the way glaciers do. Slow and inevitable. Freya shares a crust on principle, which is a very good principle. She returns to the loom and discovers she can keep the rhythm without thinking about it, which is the first sign of a skill befriending a body. Runa nods once. That nod will glow for an hour. The day lengthens. Light lifts higher on the horn windows, slips down the opposite wall in shy ladders. Inga oils a hinge because gratitude likes to squeak less. Leaf marks a line on the plank with chalk and a batten, a thin strip of wood that makes straight lines feel admired. He saws along the mark with even strokes, not sawing, really, but convincing. The offcut drops with the small satisfaction of a sentence finding its full stop. Visitors come the way visiting does in winter, with a reason but staying for none. A young smith's apprentice arrives to borrow the brace and an auger bit. Leaf passes them over with a talk about heat colors and tempering that sounds like a recipe for confidence. Inga exchanges a comb for a ribbon dyed weld yellow and makes a payment in promises. When the goat's kid, send word, will bring cloth. The neighbor who speaks 3 languages and a 4th on feast days trades a proverb for a bowl of stew. Tie what you can, bless what you can't, he says, and Runa claims it immediately for her collection. By mid-afternoon, the steam box has taught 3 more ribs about curved futures. Leaf lays them along the wall to cool, then planes a sound out of the plank he cut. No music exactly, but that clean hush the blade makes when the wood approves. Freya gathers shavings into a basket. They will be Fire's future laughter. She sneaks one into the dog's collar. The dog becomes fashionable and does not object. Inga proposes sharing hour, the quiet winter custom where everyone brings one small thing to fix and one small thing to teach. A neighbor shows how to rehead a rivet with 2 blows, 3 if you want your grandchildren to thank you. Leaf shows a lashing that keeps spars from complaining at midnight. Runa teaches a braided edge for a blanket that keeps courage from leaking out. Inga demonstrates how to fold cloth so a seam knows ahead of time where it wants to live. Freya shows the dog how to shake with either paw. This, too, is a skill. The Law Thing's bell skates in from outside, someone practicing, so they hold a rehearsal of civility. Inga poses the kind of dispute that arrives every winter. 2 neighbors, 1 drifted fence. They take turns offering solutions. Shared shoveling, a temporary marker, an exchange of bread that lasts exactly until the thaw. The room decides that the winner is the option with the most soup in it. This is nearly always the case. Late afternoon tilts. The kettle insists on being refilled. Freya volunteers, and the path to the stream answers her boots with the polite squeal of clean cold. She meets the harbor in a square of sky, where the horn windows cannot tidy the light. The water wears a skin of ice along the bank, thin as an idea that will thicken by night. She tips the jug. The stream takes it as compliment. On her way back, she runs 1 gloved finger across a post. Frost forms on the wool and glitters as if the pet had tried on jewelry. She decides to tell the loom about it. The loom appreciates good gossip. Inside, the light has deepened, not darker, just closer. Lamps are trimmed. Inga snuffs one with the bell-shaped spoon and relights it with patience, because small flames love being reminded they are welcome. The room becomes its evening version of itself, a little softer at the edges, a little readier to hold stories without dropping them. Runa begins to hum, a tune with 3 notes everyone knows. She tells a brief weather proverb to tune the room. If the ice sings twice in the same hour, wait, she says, for you are not the only one on a schedule. Leaf, who trusts advice that arrives with melody, nods as if the ribs heard it too. Inga writes it in the ledger's margin because proverbs like margins. Corners make them feel well kept. A monk, our winter friend with ink under his nails, passes the threshold like a sentence arriving at the right moment. He warms his hands at the hearth, accepts a bowl, and offers in trade an illuminated N drawn on a scrap. Its spine a mast, its diagonal a yard, tiny points like stars salted along the top. For north, for now, he says, and for no hurry. Inga kisses her fingers and presses them to the letter as if blessing were a habit one could keep spare. Write for me? Freya asks, pointing to the plank Leif smoothed. The monk smiles and lends her a quill with a nib so worn it knows how to be kind. She writes her name in straight, thoughtful strokes, not so much letters as small harbors. Leif pretends to be busy while secretly being proud. The plank appreciates its new appointment as a page. Supper arrives, not new but improved. Stew revisited, bread made into trenches again, a knob of butter that shines like quiet ambition. Someone contributes cheese with the texture of wisdom. A few dried berries appear as if by vote. Conversation meanders through lanes it knows well. Weather's old jokes, the good stubbornness of goats, the way barley, when cooked right, stops arguing with teeth. Laughter finds work and does it. After bowls are stacked, Leif brings out horsetail, greenish, tough, the plant that pretends to be sandpaper. He polishes the plank until the wood becomes pettable. Freya replaces the shaving in the dog's collar with this new, fashionable sprig. The dog becomes even more respectable and continues to sleep, which is his argument for all seasons. Inga folds cloth with the corners touching their cousins and sets aside a length for the harbor keeper who pretends not to need new sleeves. Evening gathers politely. The steam box rests. The ribs hold their curve without help. The loom's warp waits to be tucked in against drafts. Somebody at the far end of the bench teaches a child the difference between a clove hitch and a slip knot using string and patience. The child learns, then ties the dog to the bench as a demonstration. The dog negotiates release with both eyebrows. Inga walks to the door and lifts the iron ring to let out the day. The ring gives its bell, small and sure. She steps outside to rinse a bowl and meets the harbor again. Dark water carrying a few thumbnail moons where ice decides to be dramatic. The cold is the honest kind that expects your coat to keep its promises. She breathes. Her breath writes a brief, illegible letter and dissipates. When she comes back in, she brings a square of night with her that improves the room by contrast. Leif checks the lantern by the threshold. He trims the wick to a courteous height, wipes the glass with the corner of a linen that used to be a shirt and is now almost a legend, and sets the lamp back on its shelf. The small flame returns to its sentence. Here. It lands a coin of light on the plank floor, on the rope coil that likes to sit exactly there, on the edge of a bench that has heard laughs, arguments, and the quiet sound of people eating in good company. Freya lines up her 3 pebbles on the bench rail, counting, and skipping stone, and decides they are a family that never argues about whose turn it is to be the smallest. Runa braids a fringe into the day's cloth and says simply, "Enough." Inga closes her ledger with the monk's letters safely tucked between pages like boats in a protected cove. A-S-R-N. She does not build a word from them. She enjoys their patient company. Leif places his tools in their cloth roll as carefully as you'd lay a child to sleep. Sleep approaches from the corners, sensible and kind. Straw ticks are fluffed by a dance that pretends to be work. Blankets are shaken into warmth. Boots are lined by the door in a chorus of toes. The dog decides which human to accompany by pointing his snout like a compass needle and winning. The harbor keeper leaves with the last of the light. The monk sketches the lantern in his margin and writes a letter beside it that might be an O, or might be the moon practicing. You saw. If you'd like something to carry toward your pillow, take this small inventory as a string of beads. A horn window shining like a cup of tea, an adze handle worn to the color of promises kept, a loom's patient stones, a kettle with a tiny sky on its lid, a block plane that whispers yes to pine, a hinge that no longer needs attention, a rib cooling into its forever curve, a scrap of illuminated letter in a ledger that will smell faintly of smoke for years, and the dog's collar, now ornamented by a plant that believes in polish. Count them, not fast, not slow, just enough to turn counting into breathing. Outside, the fjord practices its night voice, lower, kinder, honest about cold. The sky lifts out a handful of stars and sets them where the north is, because that is the star's job, and it likes its work. The longhouse breathes the way rooms do when they know everyone inside by name. The iron ring rests against the door, a round promise asleep on its hinge. The lantern keeps its circle on the floor, and the threshold, on rope and wood grain, on the place where inside decides to be brave and become out. Breathe in for 4, out for 6. Let the room's small sounds, wool settling, a log finding its more comfortable angle, someone remembering to sigh, walk you toward quiet. No new vows, no clever hook, just the longhouse doing its winter arithmetic, wood learning its curves, cloth growing by patient inches, and people practicing the art of enough. The little light by the door speaks the same word it spoke last night and will speak tomorrow. Here, carry it with you behind your eyes. Let the northern water, just beyond the wall, agree to keep breathing at your pace, which is, as ever, exactly right. Door, hinge, shy bell, then out we go. The harbor accepts our boots, and Swan's Road accepts our plans. Morning wears the color of pewter, polished by breath. The sail lies along the boom like a folded intention. Ropes wait in their coils, calm snakes with excellent manners. Leaf runs a palm along the hull, hearing what only wood tells people who helped it become a boat. Inga settles her ledger deep in its pouch, as if tucking a child for a nap. Freya, solemn with purpose, ferries needles and spare quills aboard, as if they might catch a chill on the way. Push-off is half ballet, half barn chore. 2 neighbors lean their shoulders. The fenders sigh. The keel frees itself from the idea of shore. Oars slide out and sip the water. The first strokes sound like floorboards in an old house that likes you. Beyond the jetty, the inlet widens. The headland lifts a gray eyelid, and the sea says yes in a language that's mostly motion. Leaf keeps hand to tiller and eye to the cloth. Canvas rises. 1 clean pull. A second. The halyard sings its small rope hymn, and the sail bellies with the day's first honest wind. Oars come aboard and rest in their leathers, pleased to be thanked. Pitch in the seams loosens mildly in the new light, and gives off that pine note shipwrights secretly wear as cologne. The mast begins its low hum, the sound you can feel in teeth and ribs, which is oddly reassuring. They fall into the decent habits boats like. Leif steers by, the good sense written in the water's grain. Inga stows the heavier sacks aft so the bow won't brag. Freya learns how to sit where the ship wants her knees. The wind is quartering, helpful without being clever. The coastline walks beside them in slow steps, pines showing their winter posture, rocks squinting up at light. A patch of shingle where seals consider returning to their blameless lounging career. Mid-morning, Leif calls for a sounding. The lead line goes over. rope knotted at known fathoms, lead patterned with tallow to bring up the seabed's whisper. It returns with clean sand and a few shell crumbs. Inga smudges the sample on her thumb and nods as if the sea had filled out a form correctly. Plenty, she says, meaning depth and also mood. She coils the line like a pastry and sets it down where coils like to be admired. Freya studies the way the wake writes and then erases their handwriting. She counts the dips of the bow and discovers the sea prefers irregular mathematics, the kind that nevertheless finds its own rhythm. Inga shows her a clove hitch twice. The third time, Freya ties it while watching a gull pretend to be impartial. Leaf pretends not to notice being proud. It's a family trait to hide compliments under practical remarks. That will do is apparently code for fireworks. They eat the first simple voyage meal, a seam of cheese shaved from its mountain, flat bread convincing itself to be a plate, dried fish that forgave the ocean and decided to be supper. Inga passes one dried apple around for morale, which is a fancy way of saying everyone gets to be a little happier for no reason. The wind approves and holds steady. By afternoon, the shoreline begins to blur, and the sky practices. Evening. Leaf reefs the sail to a modest cut, less bravado, more judgment. The steering oar shifts to a new angle. The ship relaxes her shoulder and goes on. Somewhere to starboard, a porpoise blows a punctuation mark into the air. Another answers. Freya laughs, then covers her mouth, as if laughter might scare away grammar. When the light gives up the color blue for the darker page, they set watches. 2 by the mast, 2 aft. One allowed to lie down with the claim they are listening with their eyes, a statement the night forgives. Inga volunteers the middle watch for herself and Freya, the secret watch, the one where the world remembers it can whisper. Life agrees and shows Freya how to tuck under the wind shadow of the sail so the stars don't catch her squinting. The day exhales into night. The sail turns from cloth to shape. Lines soften from rope to idea. The mast becomes a dark pencil drawing notes on the sky. Far away, if there is a shore light, it is less lamp than rumor. The first star, punctual, unflustered, takes up its post over the north door. Freya tips her head back and greets it as if it were a neighbor who always remembers to water plants when you travel. In navigation, the tools are older than brass. Leaf keeps the tiller light, 1 finger, then 2, then the heel of his palm if the boat needs counsel. Inga watches the angle between mast and star, and the way the swell presses from one hip and then the other. In many northern waters, sailors learn to see by feeling. The swell carries a memory of wind from earlier, a rumor of far headlands. She explains, low-voiced, how the wake behaves when you're pinching too close to the wind, impatient, and when you're being reasonable, tidy. Freya listens the way a cup listens at a spring. Waves light briefly with tiny sparks. Not magic exactly, though magic would be proud to be mistaken for it. The oar tips make green fireflies. The bow throws off a brief comet tail. Bioluminescence is a long word for look how the sea draws when we touch it. Freya trails her fingers and leaves a path a constellation might follow if it were feeling playful. The ocean is writing with glow chalk, she whispers. Inga says, let's not tell it chalk hates water. It's doing beautifully. The wind keeps its part of the agreement. A gull passes now and then, making night shapes you can read if you don't blink. Once, a small shadow on the surface becomes briefly a seal's head, then water again. as if the sea tried on a hat and returned it to the library. On their watch, Inga tells Freya how certain tales speak of sunstones, a crystal that finds the sun through cloud, helpful when the sky is shy. Perhaps, she says, stories travel too, and sometimes they bring truth with their luggage. Tonight, the sky is generous and needs no cleverness. The Dipper leans as always. The North Star minds its manners. You could travel this lane with your pockets empty of everything except patience. Between star checks, there are the chores that comfort rather than burden. Inga greases an oarpin, reluctant to admit it ran dry. Freya nestles the sail needles deeper into their pouch and counts them carefully, as if numbers were a lullaby. Leaf, off watch, but never fully away, adjusts the sheet a handbreadth. The sail sighs into a better thought. Cold lifts from the water and settles around their faces like polite hands. Cloaks grow more grateful. Breath comes white and then goes where breath goes. They pass a small patch where the swell confesses to a shallow underfoot, just a tone change. The lead line goes down again, obedient as ever, and returns with sand too clean to worry about. Plenty, the neighbor murmurs, but softer this time, in case the sea has ears for compliments. Midnight stretches like a cat and finds its most comfortable angle. Freya's eyes do that practical thing human eyes do at sea. They trade crisp edges for larger truths. The sail is a certainty. The boom is an underline. The bow is a soft suggestion. She can tell, with a new pride that sits low and warm, when the helm leans over generous or over cautious, and leans herself a finger left or right so the boat feels accompanied in its decisions. Inga notices and says nothing. Approval sometimes reads loudest when printed small. A faint northern light lifts its curtain far on the rim of the world. Just a wash. The color of mint remembering dawn. It rises, thinks better of theater, and folds itself politely away. Freya stores it under true events I might describe later with extra adjectives. Inga smiles the way adults do when the sky shows a private trick and lets a child keep it. Near the change of watch, the wind adds a note, not higher, just more curious. Leaf stands, stretches the kind of stretch that is half prayer, and listens with his teeth. He bears the helm off a whisper to ease the canvas. The mast hum slips to contentment again. There, he says to the boat, the way a shepherd says it to a dog already doing the right thing. Someone. Stomach reminds everyone soup was a morning event. Inga pours a cup of thin ale, mostly pretending to be water, and the crew pass it hand to hand with the ceremony reserved for shared small comforts at unreasonable hours. A sliver of dried apple finds its way to Freya's palm. She tucks half under her tongue and feeds the idea of apples to the immediate future. Clouds produce a brief experiment in unhelpfulness. Stars smudge. The horizon decides to be coy. Inga does what sailors do when the sky turns page without a bookmark. Trusts the swell, keeps an eye where the dark is least dark, and watches the wind write its opinion on the water's surface in tiny cat's paw ripples. Leaf checks the tiller leather with thumb and habit. Sound returns to sense. The cloud walks off, dignity intact, leaving a new star or two that had been waiting for their cue. They heave to for a little while near an island they cannot yet see, but can smell. Pine, damp stone, the cold bread smell of sand. The boat settles with the sail luffing softly, and the rudder angled to hold her in a courteous pause. Rest happens in turns. Freya is allowed an hour's cradle time under the boom, cloak over shoulders, the bundled sail becoming a wall she can lean her dreams against. Sleep at sea is not silence. It is permission to let others listen for you. She wakes to the sound of water answering water, and to a sky that has slightly upgraded its stars. Toward dawn, the wind grows a little more persuasive, a good thing, so they ease off and lengthen their stride. The sail, reefed still, pulls like a horse with decent manners. Far ahead, the darkness is less absolute in one place. Headland, cove. The shape arranges itself out of not quite black and into gray. They run for it in no hurry, because hurry is for fires and bad bread. A reef waits off the point, where the water breaks in a line no taller than a man's shoulder, but firm about being respected. Leaf feels the change in the boat's gait and shifts a point. Inga glances down at the wake to see if the curve matches the map in her head. It does. The bow slides between two opinions of water and enters the cove as though answering an invitation written earlier and delivered on time. Anchoring is a small liturgy. The stone and iron engage with the bottom in a conversation that ends with "stay." A line runs to a ring, is set in a rock that has known boats even before it knew its own name. The boat rounds up, nose into breeze, and falls into that soft, tethered dream boats have when they're safe. Then Soup does what Soup does best at dawn. Forgets it was ever thin. Inga wakes a potful with herbs saved for days that deserve to be better. The steam carries meanings no sentence could manage at this hour. Freya takes the first cup, like a knight with a holy grail, and warms her hands around it until the heat travels up her wrists into common sense. The island, close now, shows its winter cuts. Low juniper, a scatter of stones, a lick of sand where a small fire from some other night has left a black benediction. A gull suspended over the cove confers with the morning and decides to let things happen. There is time for a small walk. Leaf and a neighbor row the short distance to shore to stretch legs in the way legs like. Inga and Freya sort coils for pride and check lashings for thoughts of treachery. The coils behave, and the lashings claim innocence. The lantern, trimmed earlier, glass wiped with the corner of a sleeve, gets cracked open for a look. Wick true. Flame modest. Glass clean enough to make the next circle handsome. When the rowboat returns, they eat the rest of the soup because the bowl asked nicely. Freya pockets 2 pebbles from the cove, with the solemn promise to return them if their numbers misbehave. Leaf mends a small chafe on a line with a neatly turned serving of twine. The repair is better than new, because it knows the story of why. Then up anchor, with the decent grunt that says "good morning" to the back. The sail uncurls to its proper size. The boat leans and shows off a little because boats may preen now and then if the wind approves. Outside the cove, the sea has cooled its attitude and become the kind of surface you want at breakfast. Firm, simple, with a suggestion of generous days to come. They bear away on a course that will bring them toward the island market by afternoon, a place of trestle tables and brass scales, of cloth wound onto friendly elbows and amber that remembers old sunlight. But that is another part. For now, let's pocket what the night taught in quiet coins. Stars oblige when asked politely. The mast will tell you if you're listening impolitely. The lead line never lies because it doesn't know how. Soup at sunrise is almost a religion. Bioluminescence is the ocean's way of taking notes about your passing. And a reef that looks small at noon is stern in the dark, so be on time for its opinions. Swan's Road keeps a steady shoulder on the water. The wake writes its tidy scroll. The oar pins hold their tongues now that Greece has reminded them of manners. Inga checks her ledger as if reading a bedtime story backward. Not to sleep, but to wake. Leaf flicks the tiller with 2 fingers, and the boat straightens enough to make the stars nod yes. Freya watches the North Star for 3 breaths, then watches her own breath for 3 more, and decides these tasks are twins. If you'd like to carry night toward your pillow later, you can choose a handful of objects from the deck and let them become beads on a string, the cool brass of the scale waiting in its wrap. A length of hemp line served with tar until it looks like a black rope wearing its best coat. The wooden block that sighs when the halyard runs through. The lead weight with its honest smear of sand. A piece of hard bread that suddenly tastes like a feast because the wind worked for it. The steering oar's leather, oiled to the color of rain, and the small, well-behaved lantern, its flame trimmed, its glass a quiet circle that doesn't argue with the moon. When evening returns, because it will, and you know what to do then, the lantern will make its coin of gold on plank and rope in the wet edge of a world that enjoys being kind. For now, daylight grows. The headland becomes a shoulder. Somewhere ahead, a bell will lift and settle and call the market to its gentle attention. Until then, breathe the way the water does. Out and in. Hush and hush. The sea has agreed once more to keep the pace you set. The little light, waiting for its hour, repeats the sentence it never tires of. Here, the island announces itself with working sounds. A mallet finding its note in a cooper's palm. A rope slapped once against a bollard to remove yesterday's salt. The first lid lifted from a barrel of pickled something that plans to improve everyone's patience. Swan's Road eases alongside a timber quay whose posts remember the names of many ropes and never hold grudges. A boy in a cap catches the thrown line without making it dramatic. The ocean's back and forth dials down a notch, as if even waves know that markets ask for indoor voices. Stalls become rooms by unfolding. A trestle table gains legs, braced with a wedge that would rather be helpful than straight. Cloth bolts lean into flattering light. A brass scale sits down in its wooden box. Pans nested like cupped hands, weights sleeping in their round little beds until honesty wakes them. Tallow lamps assemble, loyal and plain. A row of beeswax candles looks like a small choir rehearsing the vowel as so. The wind noses through and scolds a loose corner. A woman in a blue shawl secures it with 2 quick pins and a remark about weather that makes the wind repent. Inga arranges a piece of linen over a borrowed plank and empties her travel's small treasure with the calm of a woman who knows both the worth of a bead and the worth of a smile. Amber first, warm drops of trapped sunlight, each bead with its own minor geography. Clouded honey, tea made strong, a stray straw thread, paused in eternity. Then 2 bone combs, carved with vines that forgot to stop. Then a coil of wool cloth, oiled with lanolin, practical as a good proverb. A pouch of iron nails, shaped like punctuation with opinions. A little ledger, wrapped in leather that smells faintly of hearth smoke and elsewhere. She smooths the cloth flat with both palms, which is how traders everywhere invite the day to be civil. Leaf steps along the quay toward the tool sellers, the way iron finds lodestone in its free hours. Here lies a row of familiar hopes, adzes with swan neck grace, augers that promise to remove circles from wood politely, broad axes that know how to decide. A smith wipes a blade with an oil-slick rag and hands it to Leaf, as if officiating a quiet ceremony. He balances the adze on 2 fingers, nods at its center of gravity as if greeting a neighbor, and tests the edge with his thumbnail. The edge whispers present. He does not yet buy. He asks the edge to continue proving its character while he walks. Freya plants herself between Inga's stall and the wide world, the perfect place for helpers who also prefer to see everything. Her pockets contain 3 flat stones, counting, also counting, and the blue bead gifted in a different market, which she rubs like a tiny planet when decisions need orbiting. A dog. Every market has one employee of the month, circles once, sniffs for fish history, accepts an invisible promotion, and allows her to scratch the headquarters between his ears. Trade begins not with haggling, but with noticing. The cloth seller 3 stalls down performs a careful, just passing toward Inga's amber and pauses as if surprised by beauty he fully expected. His beard is salted by winters. His eyes have the look of someone who can price a breeze. He greets Inga in a braid of tongues, Norse with low German stitches, a Slavic vowel or 2 tucking the edges. Inga answers in kind. Markets are dictionaries that walk around and feed you lunch. He lifts a bead between finger and thumb. The bead collects his face, the sky, and 1 gull into a tiny museum. Storm's apology, he says approvingly. Inga offers a sari of appropriate size. The sea left it on a strand where the wind sounded like brooms. Stories oil bargains the way tallow treats hinges. He smiles, unfolds a bolt of undyed cloth, and invites Inga's palm to judge it. The cloth is honest. It will turn wind and accept dye and be mended publicly when the time comes. Inga measures with an L, her shoulder to extended finger, a mapping that contains both muscle and tradition. He sets the brass weights, a stamped bird, a rectangle with a notch, a disc that pings faintly when it thinks. Beads click into the opposing pan, and the beam settles into that exquisite middle that means 2 truths agree. They split the difference on a yard of finer weave with humor, and then call the matter done with bread logic. Inga tucks the cloth beneath the plank, sets aside 2 amber beads for future conversation, and moves her ledger's thong to a new page that already knows its numbers. Leif's feet bring him to a plank laid with smaller iron. Rivets, shaped like mushrooms with good hats, clenched nails, a brace with its bit ground at an angle that speaks fluent oak. The smith, forearms like philosophy, soot in the place where sleep goes on work days, talks temper with him in a dialect of colors. Straw, then brown, then purple. Quench there if you love your grandchildren. They discuss bog iron and the way peat gives up its grudges to fire. He buys a fist of rivets and an auger bit, not because he must, but because the ship enjoys gifts, and one should keep boats slightly spoiled. Freya finds the bead seller, who melts glass into amenable cylinders and winds it around metal rods until circles say yes. A spiral of white in blue catches her eye, like frost remembering spring. The woman shows her how the bead cools into its own patience. A quick breath, a dip in sand, a murmur that might be a blessing or might be a recipe. Freya pays with a story. Children are not always allowed coin, but stories hold perfectly respectable purchasing power in many ports. The woman gives her a bead for good listening and tells her to keep it in a pocket that doesn't get opinions from salt. A monk's corner appears as if ink built it. A small chest becomes a desk. A sheet of scraped vellum lies down like an obedient cloud. A quill wakes in fingers that have copied patience into hundreds of letters. His script is square and steady. Freya watches his hand build a fence of verticals and then plant vowels like gardens between. Inga greets him with brightness and produces a bead, small, clear, carrying a dust speck that is maybe a seed, maybe a moon. For light inside your letters, she says. He gifts a margin scrap in return, an illuminated O with a lantern drawn where most scribes would place a flower. For Orbis, he smiles, the circle of the world, which we clearly have under control. He winks with restraint. The market warms to its work, which is also its leisure. Barrels roll and settle with small, dignified thuds. A woman sells cheese with the posture of someone who respects cows, knives, and the patience of salt. A fisherman promises his fish met only the finest nets and the second best fate. The bag maker explains his stitches the way a doctor explains bones. Someone buys rope not because theirs is broken, but because rope's mood improves the more of it you own. Inga trades for woad-dyed cloth with a seller whose fingers are permanently blue at the pads, as if the sky lent him permanence. They discuss matters and weld, plant pots that smell like old arguments, and recipes the color of weather. This blue does not forgive stains, the seller warns pleasantly. Then we shall be careful around stew, Inga answers, which is not a promise, but a public intention. They arrange for a length of blue and a length of undyed to go home together like neighbors who secretly wished for this all winter. Leif stops at a forge where a young smith is practicing the kind of rivet that sleeps well. They set a demonstration. The smith heats iron to a shade of orange that prefers compliments, sets the hot rivet, 2 blows, then a third, because Leif raises an eyebrow shaped like for posterity. The rivet's head spreads obediently. The whole says thank you by not complaining. They speak of clinker planking, the quilt of overlaps that makes ships shrug off seas, and of carvel, which trades overlap for flush in larger dreams. Different hymns, Leif says, same choir. The smith grins with cold teeth. Freya is recruited by a scale keeper to serve as official pan examiner. She ensures, solemn as a bishop with a spoon, that no grit hides under the weight's corners. The scale keeper murmurs to the crowd that fairness has a new inspector. Coins hop more truthfully from palm to metal. A small line forms because people enjoy being watched by benevolent authority when money is involved. Midday sneaks in, not with drums, but with smells. Fish giving in gracefully to the pan, bread pried open by steam, a pot of barley pretending to be plain until Dill talks sense into it. Inga buys a bowl of stew that contains 3 herbs and 1 apology, for last winter's pickles perhaps, and they eat standing in a good patch of shade. Leif offers Freya the last bite on his trencher. She refuses with the generosity of someone who has already calculated the dessert stalls and wants to arrive with credentials. A woman sells something like Skyer, tart and heroic, and a man pours thin ale that suggests water gently remembered the idea of grain. After lunch, the day agrees to carry slightly fewer baskets at once. Inga begins the conversion work. Amber into cloth, cloth into grain, grain into favors, favors into future rooms. She bargains with a farmer for rye, who measures with a scoop older than both of them and twice as certain. She trades with the cooper's cousin for 2 barrels whose staves smell faintly of apples, either from memory or wishful thinking. She pays partly with cloth and partly with a promise to fetch saltfish at the price of good manners. Promises are legal tender here. The ledger's margin gains a quiet star beside this one. Leaf consults with a wheelwright about a cart with opinions. They tighten a tire and heat it in a ring of flame that looks ceremonial and is actually hygienic. He holds a spoke. The wheelwright hammers. Both listen for that perfect ring that says circle reclaimed. When the wheel is whole again, the cart accepts its fate with a grateful creak. The wheelwright pays Leaf with a nail that knows which way to be hit, which is a compliment disguised as iron. Freya drifts toward a storyteller in a twilight blue cloak, the shade markets used to slow the sun. He tells a short tale about a lantern that convinced a storm it was already morning, which we have heard and approved. Then he tells about a trader who spent a bead too early in the day and had to recite a proverb to earn it back. 2 good trades make a third, Freya offers, a little proud to find the proverb in her pocket. Exactly, the storyteller says, and 3 make a pattern. Beware patterns that claim to be laws. He sells her nothing and gives her a riddle to carry instead. What weighs fair and grows lighter when shared? She considers and keeps it for later. Near the pier, an argument politely declines to become one. A weight is light by a whisper. Inga notices, mentions it gently. The scale keeper adjusts, and the market applauds not with hands, but by going on. Honesty gets a second wind in places where correction arrives with dignity. The wind shifts. The lamps on the tables lean their flames toward new company. Beeswax, perfuming the afternoon, achieves its best ambition. Everyone's sleeve smells faintly like patience. In the distance, a bell gives a lazy ring in case anyone forgot the hour. No one did, but it is pleasant to be reminded. There are quiet shadow booths for things the world would rather we left in shadow. People made goods, strength sold as spectacle. We notice by not gawking and continue to shadier, kinder stalls. Inga steers Freya with the lightest touch and buys instead a packet of seeds from an old woman whose hands look like soil and kindness. For places that will need green, the woman says. Inga tucks the packet into the ledger, near the monk's O letter and seed deciding to keep each other company. Leaf returns to the tool plank and commits to the adze whose balance spoke well earlier. He pays partly with rivets, partly with a promise to demonstrate the new blade's humor at the key before supper. All good tools have one joke. They tell it slowly. The smith wraps the adze in oiled cloth with the intimacy of a nurse buttoning a cuff, and Leaf's hand remembers the weight the way a hand remembers a child who keeps changing and is always the same. Freya makes a collection that is not quite a purse and not quite a museum. 2 new beads, spiral and fox eye. A braid of dyed thread traded for a song. 3 pebbles that look exactly like 3 other pebbles she already owns, but are obviously rarer, and the storyteller's riddle, which grows larger the more she carries it. She adds a small brass ring, gifted by the scalekeeper, for future fairness, and slides it onto a string next to her star. It clinks discreetly, an honest little sound. A brief emergency. A wind-tilted awning smacks a barrel, and a small child decides to fall over in sympathy. Half the market moves to catch the awning. The other half returns the child to equilibrium. A third half markets are good at fractions, laughs softly at the minor drama's good manners. A new peg is set slightly farther from clumsy boots. Someone says, "There," in Leaf's exact vowel. The wind files a change of address. Inga completes a loop that began at dawn. She trades the last handful of amber, keeping the mascot bead, naturally, for a stack of homespun that will behave nicely under a needle when next winter knocks. The cloth seller throws in a narrow strip for mending, which is how traders say, "I liked this conversation." Inga gives him a proverb in return: pay with weights, profit with thanks, and he pockets it as if it were a tool he might sharpen later. The skald launches a small afternoon song by the fish stall, a tune that lists headlands as if counting beads on a string. Bornholm and Åland, Falsterbo, like a lifted chin, islands that sound like sighs, and others that sound like someone took a gulp of the sea before speaking. People hum because the chorus is exactly 3 notes and has the decency to behave. Fishermen harmonize without admitting it. Even the gulls soften their vowels. The monk returns to Inga's table to ask whether she has any short truths that would sit politely in a margin beside a psalm. Inga offers the law from Winter: tie what you can, bless what you can't. He writes it with care, gives the tea a crossbar you could hang a coat on, and tucks 2 tiny lanterns in the descenders because he can't help himself. He offers Inga a new illuminated S, its curve a wave, its tail a rope end, and Inga slides it between the ledger pages with the satisfaction of a book kissing its bookmark. Afternoon mellows, as afternoons have always aimed to do. In the quieter light, Leaf demonstrates the ads to a small crowd. He sets a scrap of pine on a block, shows the stance, knees reasonable, spine on speaking terms with itself, and lets the head fall short, rhythmic, correct. Curls lift and land like quiet applause. He does not boast about the tool. The tool, pleased, declines to boast about him. A child requests a curl for a crown. Leaf produces 3, rule of 3, a superstition he never called superstition. 1 for the child, 1 for the dog, 1 for the idea that everyone here keeps getting a little better at being themselves. Freya discovers the riddle's answer while watching the scale receive a crowd of small trades. She tugs Inga's sleeve. "Fairness," she whispers. "It weighs fair and grows lighter when shared." Inga's smile is the kind that warms hands. The storyteller overhears and awards her a ribbon of blue as payment for right answers given at the right volume. The ribbon migrates to her wrist and immediately becomes official. Wrists enjoy titles. The last bargain stitched, the last coils tied, the market turns toward its evening version of itself. Candles take over from the uninterested sun, and the tallow lamps prove again that loyalty outshines beauty when you need to see where your feet are. The scalekeeper begins putting weights back into their small beds. They sleep with the dignity of tools that were honest all day. A cooper flips a barrel to sit on its head. It makes the thump sound that means nothing dramatic happened inside. Cloth sellers brush their bolts the way you might put a child's hair to rights before bed. They push off with the ease of people who plan to return. The boy in the cap catches the last "thank you" with one hand and slings it back across the water without splashing. The harbor bell practices a polite sentence. Gull silhouettes shift from accountant to chorus. The air tastes slightly of supper in rooms not their own. On deck, they stow the barrels where barrels enjoy sleeping and lay cloth over them the way kindness covers work. Inga counts the grain into her ledger, but not too precisely. Some numbers prefer being admired to being named. Leif checks the new auger bit by making a small round hole in a piece of scrap that never argued about becoming scrap. The hole pleases everyone by existing and needing nothing further. He swabs the deck with a bunch of brush that used to be juniper and still remembers smelling excellent. Supper is market simple. Bread that made friends with heat at noon, fish that forgot the sea in exactly the right way, dill that Inga cannot resist praising to its face. The last of the morning soup warms on the little iron trivet near the lantern's nook. It tastes like a committee of good intentions finally reaching consensus. Freya gets 3 honey sweets from nowhere. Markets excel at nowhere and invests them wisely. 1 for now, 1 for the night watch, 1 for the idea of tomorrow. After dishes become as clean as water and would require, they let the boat rock them to the edge of stillness. The sail, reefed and responsible, carries them in the lee of the island until the headland's shoulder opens the way to open water. Bioluminescence reconsiders their oar tips and decides to shine again, modest and green. The new adze sleeps in a wrap beside the mast, dreaming of useful curves. The blue bead at Freya's wrist catches lantern light and pretends to be a tiny moon on assignment. Before full dark, Leif opens the stern lantern. It has new smudges from helpful hands, honor scars. He trims the wick with the precise scissor of a thumbnail, a gesture so familiar his fingers do it without him. Inga breathes on the glass and wipes it with a corner of linen, not because the glass is vain, but because clarity is a public service. Freya sets the lantern in its shelf with bishoply care and watches the gold circle settle on wet plank, on the coil that has earned its night off, on the edge where water begins to consider becoming reflection. If you want to take the market along to your later pillow, lay out a small inventory the way Inga lays out her wares. A brass weight that knows when to say enough. A strip of woad blue you could wear as courage. A nail that won't accept laziness from a hammer. A rivet with its hat set at a sensible angle. A bead holding a private cloud. A scoop that makes honest dunes and rye. A recipe for pickled brightness that needs only time and the to wait. And a proverb that once said, makes the room behave. Wind softens, rope hums, the mast takes up its one-note song. The island behind them gathers candles into constellations that will not be recorded on any map, and are therefore the best kind. The sea resumes its old patient story, chapter by chapter, swell by swell. The boat agrees to be a quiet room until morning. Above, the star that minds the north door minds it again. So dependably, Freya stops checking and just breathes. The lantern, which has never tried to be a moon and is therefore better company, keeps its coin of gold exactly where you need it. On the next knot to be tied, the next seam to consider, the next calm to remember. Its circle says the word it has said since we began. Here, not as a command, not as a boast, but as invitation and answer. Keep that coin in your pocket for later. Breathe out for 6, in for 4. The northern water has agreed, with markets and monks, with ropes and songs, to keep your pace. Hush and hush. They leave the market island with the warmth of bread still in their sleeves, and the smell of beeswax politely insisting it has nothing to do with happiness. Swans rode shoulders into the open, and the morning settles without suspense. A pale sky that believes in order. A wind that signs its name neatly in the sail. Gulls filing minutes from yesterday's fish meeting. The horizon is tidy, the kind of day that implies it has read the manual. Around noon, the weather writes a letter. It begins in straight lines. A bar of gray gathers in the west, long and unblinking, the kind of cloud that travels with luggage. Light goes flat, turning the sea into hammered tin with good posture. Cat's paws, those small dark patches of breeze, start stalking the water as if practicing pounce. The wind clears its throat like someone who has prepared remarks. Leaf, who respects correspondence, reads the sky once and answers without drama. Reef, he says, one word, the kind you set down gently and let do work. Hands move. Clumsy canvas becomes a sensible handkerchief. Reef points are tied in the quick, trustworthy knots Leaf favors, the kind that hold now and forgive later. The boom drops a courtesy. The sail decides to be modest, out of character, but becoming. Inga secures what likes to migrate when the world remembers it can move. The spare oars, the barrel hoop they meant to return to the cooper, her ledger tied shut with the harbor keeper's gifted twine. She checks the lashings on grain and cloth, because grain prefers to calm, and cloth abhors surprise. She tucks the little packet of for days that insist deeper into the food bag, a friend saved for moments when politeness fails. Freya learns the storm version of listening. Leaf sets her in the safe middle, shows how to hold with knees, not teeth. Watch the line beyond the nearest wave, he says, tapping the horizon's shoulder. The one closest lies, the one behind it tells the truth. She nods, like someone who intends to pass a difficult exam. The wind's first true gust arrives, a steady palm against the sail. Swan's Road leans confidently, like a dancer who trusts the floor. Spray lifts, remembers gravity, returns with better manners. The mast takes a deeper note. Rain begins as practice, stitches, then threads, then cloth. The sea's color darkens, a grown-up decision. The crest of each wave frays white, as if the water had decided a lace collar would lend authority. Inga laughs once at the inevitability of a wet hood. Well, she says to no one in particular, our barrels won't die of thirst. Freya, who is sufficiently warm and sufficiently brave, decides to adopt this sentence for later use. Count, Leaf tells the oars, and they do. Strokes like a metronome that teaches panic about rhythm. He counts differently under his breath. That small arithmetic helmsmen share with weather. 1 for the gust, 2 for the lull, 3 for the change he expects, but will not be bossy about. He eases the sheet the exact width of a palm. The sail stops shouting and returns to prose. The steering oar hums a lower vowel. Ropes add their own consonants. The boat becomes a choir with no soloists. The swell grows furniture-sized. The bow lifts onto a big shoulder of water, pauses like someone considering a joke, then slides down the back with a hiss and a laugh and a bucket of cold punctuation. Freya hoots once and then clamps her mouth with both hands, not out of fear, but because joy at the wrong volume feels like bad manners around important weather. Lead line, Inga says, and a neighbor lets the weighted cord go into the hiss. It comes back with honest sand pressed into its tallow and one small shell shard the color of moon edges. Plenty, the neighbor reports. Plenty, Inga repeats, word as blanket. Wind writes faster. The rain thickens to the kind that forgets it used to be cloud. The world narrows in the useful way. Deck, sail, hands, breath, the curve of the next necessary thing. Leaf bears off a point, asks the boat to run freer. Oars help through the heavier rolls, just enough to keep the bow on good terms with the swell. A cross gust bullies in. The boom rehearses drama. Leaf pays out a handbreath, and everyone agrees to indoor voices again. "Storm?" Freya asks, nodding at the western breeze. "Lesson," Inga answers, pulling the girl's hood forward with a smile that makes weather feel happily outnumbered. "A weather with opinions," Leif adds. "We'll be courteous and we'll be fine." Courtesy covers many sins at sea, like butter for a day that burned. The island Inga remembered from other years: low pines, a dark shoulder, a cove like a held breath, shows itself in the honest gaps between rain sheets. Shelter, she says, not commanding the day, just letting the day know a good idea is on the table. Leaf trims again. Swan's Road stretches out and runs, not fleeing, just using what she was built to use. Spray lifts sideways, and for 3 heartbeats, the boat feels placed upon a belt of moving glass. Then the glass softens to water again. They ride that too. Closer, the cove decides to be geometry instead of rumor. A finger of rock, a low spit, water with its shoulders down. The change is immediate, as if a door closed gently on a scoldy hallway. Leaf drops most of the sail, leaves a scrap to mind their nose. Oars bite and lift, bite and lift. The anchor goes down with a pause that is really a prayer. It bites and holds. A second line runs to a ring in a rock cheek that has known boats longer than it knew its own name. The boat sighs into tethered dream. Rain backs off, as if it remembered an appointment elsewhere. Wind passes over the cove and continues down the coast to lecture other water. Inga grins, with the face of a person whose stew plan has moved from hypothetical to inevitable. "Soup," she declares. She couples the iron pot to a small traveling fire that Leif coaxes from dry shavings he keeps for days like this, plus a flint, some stubbornness, and the luck children believe in so thoroughly it often shows up. Freja lays the blue bead and her 3 counting stones on a flat rock to warm, a decision adults pretend is unnecessary and then approve because it is charming. She wrings her sleeves without complaint. The smell that rises from the pot is apology and welcome together. Barley thickening scents, onion getting generous, fish remembering what gratitude tastes like, herbs from for days that insist making practical magic. The first spoonful forgives everyone their weather choices. They could sleep aboard. They sometimes do. But the cove's path draws a promise up the hill. A farm half seen between pines and gray rock. A sod roof that believes in itself. Smoke writing the day's last sentence. They leave the boat properly, anchor good, line good, lantern trimmed and closed, and climb. The farm is exactly where the weather would have put it, had the weather been raised well, close enough to the sea to know its tone, far enough to answer back. The door is heavy planks, iron ring bright from hands. Leaf lifts it. The bell it carries gives that modest note we keep meeting, the sound of iron seeing you. Inside, warmth offers to adopt them. Sigrid, the woman of the house, has forearms like bread dough and a face that treats trouble as a thing you stir until it behaves. Ulf, her husband, has a beard with opinions and the gait of a man who knows where the woodpile ends and begins. Ragna, the grandmother, kin to every runa in every harbor, sits by the hearth with knitting that looks like safety measured. A boy, Oscar, appears with kindling and the kind of grin that lights rooms 2 seconds before fire does. A dog performs the official welcome, which is to locate the wettest cloak and lie on someone's feet. There is little talk of may we. Hospitality is older than seasons here. Inga offers a pouch of salt without fuss. Sigrid accepts with the quiet gladness of a cook, offered a favorite shell for her drawer. Ulf takes one look at Leif's hands and points with his chin at a door latch that has begun to argue with time. Leif, with the solemn joy of a man granted an excuse to fix something, nods and checks the hinge. Cloaks hang, dripping into respectability. Boots arrange themselves near the fire like pilgrims. Freya discovers the ancient ceremony of warming hands on a stone that has sat near a fire for so long it believes itself a cousin. Ragna hands her a towel that has been a towel longer than many people have been people. "You'll grow into the other one," she says kindly, and Freya believes this is true about towels and also days. A stew appears that might be kin to all other stews, but carries the accent of this house. Potatoes, a little carrot, herbs that keep their own counsel. A circle of fat on top that melts into a single persuasive idea. Bread is shoulder-cracked and handsome, a crock of something sour in the proud way. Milk, persuaded by time, waits to be invited. The first spoonful tells each of them where their center is and how to find it again if mislaid. Leif shows the latch his adze handle patience. A wipe of oil, a word with the catch, a file's small sermon. He lifts the ring, lowers it. The bell answers with confidence rather than surprise. "There," he says, "the same vowel as always." Sigrid lifts the latch twice for the pleasure of hearing correctness. Ulf grants Leif a grunt that is local for admired. Freya learns the farm version of science. Oscar demonstrates the making of fire from 3 damp twigs, a rumor, and all his dignity. The first attempt becomes smoke that refuses to choose a direction. The second becomes flame, small as a compliment. The third becomes actual fire. He bows as if the house had paid for tickets. Freya applauds with the seriousness of someone issuing a certificate. The dog considers awarding a prize and settles for moving to the new warm spot. Inga and Sigrid meet halfway between ledger and pantry. Cloth for root vegetables, fish for onions, a future visit for a promise to mend. They swap recipes like cousins. Sigrid gifts a method for pickled carrots that cheer up days that say they won't. Inga offers a stew tactic involving dill that is performed admirably. Ragna contributes a proverb for weather. "Roofs like gratitude," she says. "Floors like clean feet. Doors like being lifted by people who mean it," Leif, who always means it when he lifts anything, smiles into his cup. After supper, repairs migrate from tools to talk. Ulf tells a very short story about a boat that forgot to listen and met a rock that did not. "The boat learned," he adds. "We like short stories in this house." Ragna teaches Freya 2 stitches, one meant to be seen, firm, proud, beautifully plain, and one meant to be hidden, kind, forgiving, the sort that keeps warmth in. "Use both," she advises. "Strangers admire the first. Family survives because of the second." Freya practices on a scrap and decides she will mend everything in sight if allowed. Sigrid sets out a board game whose rules are noticing and patience. Inga loses once on purpose, training the board to be fair, and then can't bear to do it again. Laughter lands in soft thumps. Someone finds a string, and teaches Oscar a knot that will save a barrel from going on holiday. He learns it, then ties the dog to the bench and unties him to prove the point. The dog records a formal complaint and then drops it. Leaf, being Leaf, puts his hands on the house as if it were a boat. Palms reading the grain of the table, the trim of the window, the beam above the hearth with its smoke-stained patience. He runs a thumb along a crack and decides it is a story, not a problem. He sands the adze handle with a bit of horsetail from a jar by the door until the wood warms to the color of a good reason. He tar threads the grip with cord. Future hands will thank him on a cold morning without knowing why. There is tea that is not tea, barley roasted until stern, and then coaxed into kindness, sweetened just enough to make sense. Ragna produces a plate of dried apples and says, "The orchard in winter," as if she were introducing a guest. Freya tries one, chews, decides apples do, in fact, have winter dialects. She strokes the dog's ear at exactly the speed dogs recommend. The rain runs out of ambition. The roof shakes off its lecture and becomes merely roof again. Outside, water drips from eaves with the confidence of watches changing. Indoors, people practice the art of enough. Beds are straw ticks that forgive knees and elbows, blankets that remember sheep, pillows that smell faintly of last summer. Ragna shows Freya the etiquette for sharing a bed with a dog. Lose quickly and pretend it was your plan. Freya learns fast. Before sleep, Sigrid repeats a house law in her own terms. "Fasten what you can, forgive what you can't," she says, touching the beam above her head, and then the latch life made younger. Ulf adds, "If the wind changes its mind, let it. You can still watch your stew." They nod at the doctrine. Dog and children are already mostly asleep, which counts as full assent. Night folds the house into careful shapes. Breathing becomes a quilt. The iron ring on the door keeps its shy bell by itself, the way tools keep their good manners in the dark. Freya tucks her star pendant under her shirt and holds one of the monk's letters, N for north and now and no hurry, against her palm until the paper warms to her. She falls away into the sort of sleep that contains rowing and soup. Inga rests her hand on the ledger where she has written nothing about storms and everything about soup. Leaf lies on his side, listens to the timbers, and hears the house tell him the weather for tomorrow in a language without nouns. He understands enough. Dawn lifts its first coin of light behind the low hill. The room counts itself awake. Sigrid has a batter that plans to be bred and succeeds. Ulf fetches water with the exact slosh rate of a man who has fetched water since there were buckets. Ragna finishes a scarf that took its time and therefore deserves admiration. Oscar demonstrates the advanced art of yawning. Inga helps in the manner that does not call itself help. Places bowls where bowls ought to be. Finds the spoon that had misgivings and convinces it. Mends a sleeve in 3 swift passes and 1 slower for beauty. They give thanks awkwardly, and often because gratitude is hard to dose correctly on mornings like this. Inga leaves 2 amber beads and a proverb written in neat letters on a scrap. Tie what you can, bless what you can't. Sigrid returns the kindness with a loaf wrapped in a cloth that smells like sensible choices and a packet of herbs labeled, in her hand, for days that remember. Leaf promises to look at the farm's shore boat next time he passes. Ulf pretends indifference and is secretly delighted. Ragna slips Freya a small pouch with 2 seeds and a thimbleful of fleece. For pockets in spring, she says, which is a bedtime story and a life plan at once. Outdoors, the world has been washed and put back in the right drawers. The cove holds its quiet like a friend who knew you before you were interesting. Swan's Road waits with that patient animal. Calm boats learn, all readiness, no fuss. Lines are checked and blessed. The lantern, smudged by many helpful hands, gets its glass wiped with the corner of a sleeve because clarity is a form of affection. Leaf trims the wick. The flame answers with a small, steady confidence. They push off. The sea, chastened and pleased with itself, offers a low, generous swell that would cradle a village. The wind is a polite suggestion instead of a plan. They leave the cove the way you leave a conversation that went exactly right. Grateful, careful, sure you will return without scheduling it. As the headland falls astern, Freya practices blessing the waves. She raises her palm, small bishop, and whispers kindness at water that no longer needs correcting. Inga counts by 4s and 6s without noticing, breath-matching sea. Leaf touches the tiller as if finishing a sentence and lets the boat supply the period. If you're packing away what the squall taught, for later, for nights when your mind attempts ambitious weather, you could fold it this way. Reef early and call it prudence, not fear. Tie what you can and let the rest know it is welcome to behave. Count until counting replaces alarm. Aim for the line beyond the nearest wave. Soup after rain is medicine no monk needs to bless. Some houses are harbors. Some harbors are houses. And doors prefer to be lifted by people who mean it. The coast resumes its agreeable progress. Birds return to their gossip. A seal logs itself as a buoy and refuses poignant interpretations. The new adds dreams in its oiled wrap of curves. It hasn't met yet. The packet for days that remember waits in the food bag for the moment taste will require history. By noon, the sky is the precise blue of a wool cloak that kept its promise. The sail leans in companionship rather than necessity. Inga opens her ledger and writes one line that is not numbers. Shelter offered, accepted, shared. She leaves a space and tucks the monk's O beside it, because some pages look better with circles. Toward evening, they will anchor in a reasonable cove. Maybe grill fish, if the line supplies one that volunteers. And then set the stern lantern in its place. It will not claim the horizon. It will not rebuke the dark. It will cast a circle exactly as big as the next good choice. On plank, on rope, on the wet edge of the world, it will say what it always says, here, without growing bored. Let that circle ride with you now. A coin of warmth in your pocket, a small light under your ribs. Breathe out for 6, in for 4. Imagine the iron ring on the farm door lifting with its shy bell one last time as if to bless your departure. The northern water, flattered by everyone's good manners today, agrees to keep your pace. Hush and hush. Frost takes the horn windows first, little ferns writing patient cursive, then the rope, then the backs of posts that never ask to be indoors. Swan's Road noses into a harbor that knows how to keep boats comfortable when months turn sensible and slow. Jetty boards creak with that old wooden cough. Smoke climbs out of roofs in steady grammar. Somewhere a pot of pitch warms until it smells like a forest remembering fire. The bargain is the same here as in a dozen good inlets. Room in a shed and a corner by a hearth in exchange for hands, stories, and the agreement not to rush anything that doesn't like being rushed. The harbor keeper, gray in her braid, quick in her eye, walks the quay with a small hammer, tapping each bollard to hear if it is in a mood to be helpful. "This one likes compliments," she says of the third, and Leaf obliges with a pat and a good citizen, which is the local language for wood. Inside the long shed, boats sleep upright like patient animals. Pegs carry coils of rope in tidy, well-behaved loops. A steam box hugs the wall with a kettle tucked against it. The whole arrangement smelling like rain stored indoors. The floor is freckled with pitch and the well-meant history of small mistakes that turned into better ways. Work arranges itself without speeches. Leaf starts the steam box, lids down, kettle murmuring, thin ribs of oak going in straight and coming out interested. Heat is persuasion, he says, like grace before bread. He bends a rib over the form, pegs it, and lets time do the rest. Cooled, the rib will forget it ever wanted to be a line. It will keep curve the way a good story keeps company. The little plane wakes and practices its joke on pine, curls rising and drifting like polite snow. Freya crowns the steering oar with a wreath of shavings and declares the oar fashionable. The shed cat pretends not to approve and keeps approving. Life sharpens with the contented rasp of a blade finding its vowel. A dull tool is a complaint pretending to be useful, he tells Freya, stropping the edge to yes. Runa leans a warp-weighted loom against the wall. Smooth stones tug the warp honest. She teaches the winter cadence of cloth. Over, under, beat, breathe. Cream grows into gray, grows into woad blue, coaxed from plants with a recipe that involves patience and an argument the dye wins. Cloth remembers hands, Runa says. We'll give it hands worth remembering. Freya beats too hard, then too soft, then in the middle, just right, winter's favorite measure. Across the lane, the smithy glows like a practical cave. Inga takes a pouch of nails and trades for rivets tempered to hold a seam when spring has ideas. The smith, a woman whose forearms earned their wisdom, heats iron through straw to brown to a rumor of purple, quenching at grandchildren's favorite note. Heat persuades, cool decides, she says. Leaf passing salutes the proverb as if it wore a uniform. Afternoons belong to hospitality. Not feasting, but the ordinary democracy of warmth. Doors open with the shy bell of iron rings. Drafts are seated politely near tallow lamps. Inga invents sharing hour each week. Bring one small repair and one small skill. A neighbor wedges a sulky pot handle true with a sliver of oak. Leaf shows a lashing that keeps spars from complaining at midnight. Runa teaches a braided edge that keeps courage from leaking out of blankets. Inga folds cloth like a map that already knows where it's going. A child recites 3 riddles. Freya answers 2 in human and 1 in dog. The dog signs off with a sigh that counts as minutes. Food keeps its winter manners. Fish return to kindness and stew. Barley convincing teeth, they are respected. Flatbread that breaks with a sound like small applause. Pickled brightness, waking bowls, the way morning wakes windows. When there is a sweet, it's dried fruit softened in warm milk and honey. Bedtime thinking kindly of itself. The law thing meets under a roof, whose beams used to be ship ribs. Toes keep their blood. Voices keep their patience. The law speaker's cadence is rope length measured by memory. A boundary moved. The width of a boot moves back again without scandal. The path to the well becomes everybody's. Oaths are taken with palms on wood that has heard oaths so long it hums. Leaf testifies once about an anchor and says there exactly when it matters. The argument sits down and behaves. On whiteout days, children tie slats to boots and practice the art of listening with ankles. Freya falls twice. The snow forgives both and keeps no ledger. Later, she warms her feet against the hearthstone, a universal apology for winter, and declares the hearth chastened and improved. Leaf whittles a toy boat from a piece of driftwood that already suspected itself. He hollows the hull, pegs a thin mast, steals a square of cloth from Runa's bag, and balances a pebble for ballast. The boat sails bravely in a washtub by the door, ringing a tiny bell tied to its bow so that news always arrives with it. Outside, the weather auditions several moods. Inside, the tub elects calm. Inga teaches reckoning with pebbles and beans on a plank. Cloth here, grain there. Favors moving diagonally, because life does. Not every ledger is numbers, she says. The harbor keeper drops off a small coil of twine for the general good, which is winter currency. The skald visits wrapped in twilight blue. His harp strings catch lamplight like frost. He sings maps at a pace memory can keep. Headlands strung like beads. And a brief lantern song about a storm fooled into thinking it was morning. People hum. No one says harmony out loud. Harmony prefers not to be named. Work becomes liturgy. Greasing oar leathers is a rite conducted with tallow, patience, and a rag faithful as a dog. Net mending hums like a good knitting pattern. Cloaks are beaten free of dust outdoors by 2 sticks and a joke. Propping a hull with sand and barrel calls for 3 sincere theirs and 1 decisive perfect from Leaf that even the barrel respects. The monk keeps a writing corner. Ink smells like rain, practicing letters. He lets Freya try her name. Uprights like posts, curves like safe water. Then gifts her an illuminated tea with a tiny lantern hanging from the tail. She gives him the proverb that one winter: tie what you can, bless what you can't. He plants it in his margin beside a psalm and draws a neat oar. Margins love good neighbors. Weather collects sayings as eaves collect icicles. If gulls face inland and sit low, keep soup, not plans. When ice sings twice in an hour, wait. Hoarfrost on the first door means company. On the second, bread. Freya carves simple runes on drift sticks, share watch, spare rope, and plants one by the shed door where jokes sprout. It turns into custom. There is a guest cloak, heavy, lanolin rich, citizenship by wool. Travelers put it on without apology and leave it wiser. Bread ends soak in milk by the fire, future courage for stew. Dill waits for its cue, because Dill is an optimist. Once, a winter wedding. Vows with usable verbs. Share the long watch. Praise each other's knots. Come home to soup. Speak gently to animals. The skald sings a recipe with a chorus. Someone taps a peg level for the joy of order. Runa ties a ribbon into a sleeve that fits nobody and therefore everybody. The room agrees to be warmer forever. On the coldest mornings, the shed smokes from the seams like a contented animal. People walk wider around each other indoors, less from caution than from regard for elbows. Lamp wicks are trimmed to the height of conversation. Inga's ledger grows heavier with the kind of weight that smells like smoke and dill. Between its pages, she tucks gifts from the monk. A-S-R-N-O-T. Letters like moorings. She does not form a word. She enjoys their company. Thaw begins with confidence instead of melting. Horn windows sip brighter light. The well path remembers its shape. Barrels laugh at their roundness when rolled. The steam box hisses like an idea becoming plan. Ribs come out agreeing. Leaf makes a new tiller leather, soft as a good thought, and rubs it with tallow until it turns the color of excellent decisions. He re-serves a line, not because it insists, but because affection is allowed to be redundant. They walk to the boat at dusk, because that's how you tell a day you noticed it. Swan's Road breathes rope and pitch. The hull remembers waves in its grain. Leaf runs a palm along her side, a blessing disguised as inspection. Inga lays her ledger on the thwart and lifts the small parade of letters, A, S, R, N, O, T, letting them warm in the air before tucking them back. Freya opens the stern lantern. Leaf trims the wick. Inga wipes the glass with the corner of a linen that has been a linen a very long time. Freya lights it with Winter's steady hand and sets it in its shelf. The coin of light lands on plank and rope, on the new tiller leather, in the old scuff from a boot that was learning. The harbor holds still respectfully. If you want to pocket that coin, it is warm enough to carry. If you'd rather leave it there, it will keep your place until morning. Spring borrows the evening and returns it improved. The boat shed doors stand open in a patient V. The bell by the headland clears its throat. Feast night leans the town toward the long hall. Boat ribs for beams, plank walls planed to remember trees. Beeswax candles rehearse the vowel of tallow lamps. Less pretty, more loyal. Hold the draughts in a neighborly stare. Bread rounds, the trenchers, arrive with crusts like architecture. A great pot has opinions and is allowed to share them. Inga is everywhere at once. Bowls, sound, weights, honest, cloth, ready to serve as napkins and weather. Her ledger hides tonight. Her letters sleep inside it, like small boats at anchor. Leaf checks trestles with a palm tuned to splinters, lays out civil tools, the little plane, the knife that turns thought into ribbon, a file that smooths arguments. He makes one practice curl to perfume the room. A child wears it behind an ear and invents a fashion. Freya stands in the doorway at that hinge of day when the first stars sign the attendance sheet. On her cord hang the bone star, rounded 4-point, patient, and the brass fairness ring. They click together like two sensible sentences. The harbor keeper arrives with eyebrows that annotate. The smith arrives with forearms that solved iron. Runa, with a strip of cloth that still imagines it might be sky. The skald with harp. The monk with ink under his nails and a brand new quill that looks already experienced. Net menders, fishers, children with pockets clinking secrets. The cat, politely uninvited, plainly attending. Feast night takes a census. Offerings remember fields and harbors equally. Roast fish with a river rumor. Barley at the exact softness that flatters teeth. Cabbage that wintered well and believes in vinegar. Pickled beets too red for shyness. Skyer with an honest shine. Ale thin enough to praise water. Dill shows up where nobody expected it and improves the neighborhood. Toasts pass like good weather, unannounced and appreciated. One for sheds that kept boats upright. One for paths kept trampled to the well. One for knots learned and unlearned. One for tools that told their jokes slowly. The skald sings the map song at winter pace. Headlands, coves, a lantern verse we have approved before. At the end of the board, the harbor keeper makes a coastline of tabletop. Stones for islands, shells for shallows, beans for a bar, a rope coil for a secretive fjord. Leaf adds a pine curl inland for a pond with ambition. Runa loops dyed wool where markets reliably remember names. Inga places 3 amber beads for harbors where kindness is legal tender. Freya keeps the old riddle in her pocket. What weighs fair and grows lighter when shared, knowing its answer already and enjoying the keeping. The monk slides a scrap of vellum to Inga, a lantern plain and round, the flame drawn as an O. For Origo, he says, the place you start from, that you discover you carried all along. She tucks it with the others inside the ledger and feels the page warm. Leaf whittles bone between courses, rounds a little disc, bores a hole with the cooper's tiniest auger, polishes with horsetail until it becomes a modest moon. He doesn't say who it's for. Freya taste tests the democratic sweets. She was fastest to volunteer. Children begin to tip asleep like chairs taken by surprise. The dog performs the horizontal in 4 positions and is congratulated. Not a procession, then a procession. Cloaks, breath, the key in frost filigree, the sea practicing its indoor voice. Life carries the stern lantern. Inga carries a match with appropriate respect. Freya presses her palm in the frost and leaves a map she doesn't need. At the shelf, wick trimmed to humility, glass cleared with a loved linen, flame set down with bishoply hands. The gold circle falls where it always falls, on plank and coil and the wet lip of the world. And everyone watches, not because it changes, but because we do. Morning has modest ambitions and is rewarded. Ice forgets its lines. Roofs example gravity. Boats in the shed look taller. People find their sea faces in a bowl and nod to their reflections like old neighbors. Farewells are thorough without ceremony. The harbor keeper taps the 3rd bollard. It replies content and is thanked. The smith presses Leaf a thin bar of iron, luck disguised as spare. Runa tucks undyed wool into Freya's palm. For pockets, the monk inks 3 dots on her thumb, for therefore that follows there, and gives Inga the lantern scrap with the O. The skald plays a chord like a door opening. Swan's Road takes the water the way a practiced horse takes the road it likes, oars sip. Sail lifts with a sigh that feels like memory deciding to be present. The inlet grants a diploma in the form of easy chop. Past the headland, the bell says the hour as if applause had manners. The day is honest. Gull insults return to dialect. A seal practices being a buoy with mixed results. Inga writes 1 line in her ledger. Leaving is a kind of returning, and closes the book as if blessing it. Soup conducts its noon liturgy. Dill cooperates. The wind behaves like a guest who actually helps with dishes. By evening, the sky wears soft wool. Leaf reefs for comfort, not necessity. Comfort outranks bravado whenever sleep is nearby. Night. The sea's old lullaby, minus theater. Bioluminescence underlines the bow with soft green handwriting. Freya takes her watch and steers by 2 instruments that have always agreed, the North Star and her breath. Inga, counting in 6s by habit, hands her the last dried apple for morale, which is another word for right now. Dawn pulls the coast into focus by the elbows. A bell with politely firm opinions sounds in a place you can't see yet, uttering a number that means home. The smell comes first, correctly. Tar, that kept its promises, wool that behaved indoors, bread intending to be useful. The longhouse roof appears at the expected angle. The dog is there because dogs are. Lines go ashore in handsome curves. A boy catches without making competence bigger than rope. Cleats cough welcome. People say again, soup, later, and mean it. Grain goes to bins. Cloth goes to shoulders and drawers where grandmothers keep time. Blue and undyed and a strip for mending. Amber finds pockets and windowsills and a shelf in the harbor keeper's office where the bell's shy note is stored in case of bad days. Leaf walks the hull with his palm like someone reading a familiar book for new jokes. Good, he tells the rivets as if they wrote themselves. Soon, he tells a serving that will want attention next week. The young boatwright returns the small plane with a face like a person who read slowly and will read again. It told the joke, he says. It made everything smoother, including me. Leaf tells him to keep it until the joke tells itself twice. Freya runs the district tour. Door ring lifted. Shy bell correct. Horn windows. Honey-colored light resuming its trick. Bench. Back remembered. Loft. Smells exactly right and therefore better. She presses the bone star to her palm and hears the little click when it greets the brass ring beside it. She counts 3 pebbles into a pocket also occupied by a dried berry she is saving for reasons unclear and perfect. Supper elects barley prime minister again. Fish volunteers to be famous. Dill votes aye. Bread acts as furniture first and surrender later. Toasts, not tall as oaks, but short as fence posts. Roads of water, houses of wood, a winter that performed wisdom instead of noise. The bell clears its throat exactly on time. Children drift into shoals beneath benches. The dog resumes his foot-warming portfolio. Night leans in. They walk to the quay together, Leaf with the lantern, Inga with the match, Freya with the end of the day on her face like leaf shadow. The stern shelf has been waiting like a calm thought. Wick, glass, flame, practiced motions, a small, precise kindness you can do with your hands when the world asks for nothing else. The coin of light lands on wood grain and rope, on the new leather and the old scuff, on the edge, where world becomes reflection. If you want to pack the journey for your own pillow, here is a quiet inventory. The shy bell's particular pitch, a plank's feel when it approves your hand, a curl of pine the color of good reasons, a brass weight that knows when to stop, tar making friends with sun, a boat's slow nod when the line comes right, a lantern drawn in a monk's margin where numbers rest, a bone star that keeps time with your breath, a proverb about tying and blessing that never shows up late, and this little circle of gold on wood, the room-sized answer to questions you don't need tonight. They don't say much. They don't have to. Leaf rests his palm on the tiller leather as if finishing a sentence he began before snow. Inga touches the ledger against her ribs for the weight of seasons on paper. Freya lifts her cord, star and ring, and lines them up with the lantern's circle, drawing a small constellation you can read without reading at all. The longhouse banks its fire. The rafters memorize one more winter before letting go. The sea keeps its promise to breathe at your pace if you'll keep yours. In for 4, out for 6. The iron ring sleeps round as an O that spells its own reason. The lantern keeps its watch, no hook, no flourish, saying the same soft word it has said from the first harbor at blue dusk to this key at home. Here, carry it behind your eyes. Let it warm the room behind your ribs. Everything else, routes and markets, storms and kindness, wintering and returning, folds like cloth into a drawer, labeled enough. Good night. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return, and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.